My name is Gina Giordani, and I'm going to be analyzing Petrie's signature style throughout the novel. Petrie packs the text full of literary devices that add layers and depth to the text. Analyzing some of the key devices in the reading reveal the author's signature style and add to the aesthetic choices that create the dynamic atmosphere and setting described in the novel. Firstly, the devices that I noticed most often, and the ones that I believe had the greatest impact on the meaning and subtext within the novel, were imagery, metaphor, personification, alliteration, understatement, repetition, and diction and syntax. Throughout the entire novel, Petrie plays on the reader's senses, although not always directly. One form of this is through her use of alliteration, found in phrases such as, "Their eyes came at her furtively from behind newspapers," or "half concealed under hands." The repetition of the H calls to mind the sound of panting and heavy breathing, emphasizing the men's desperation and want for Ludi. One key quote that I noticed the author's style in was, she noticed that once the crowd walked the length of to the platform and started up the stairs toward the street, it expanded in size. The same people who had made themselves small on the train, even on the platform, suddenly grew so large that they could hardly get up the stairs to the street together. Petrie repeats the word world frequently whenever the story is told from Ludi's point of view, due to her belief later in the novel that the place that you live in, a slum or a mansion, has a greater impact on your life and your social mobility than your skin color. This is also why trains are shown as a sort of magical in-between place. It travels in between these worlds, picking up people of all types, rich, poor, black, and white. And on the train, people are wrapped up in their true selves rather than the persona that their environment forces upon them. This is shown by the metaphor in this quote about the changing size of the people and their egos once they leave the train. The wealthy appear to physically get bigger as they boast and exaggerate their authority and wealth to the people around them. Another quote that Petrie's style is shown in is, "It was, she discovered slowly, a very strange world that she had entered, with an entirely different set of values. It made her feel that she was looking through a hole in the wall at some enchanted garden. She could see, she could hear, she spoke the language of the people in the garden, but she couldn't get past the wall." The syntax in this sentence has a large effect on how it stands out to the reader. The use of a dependent clause as a sentence sticks out uncomfortably, and the commas used for listing her senses break the stream of consciousness that makes up the novel's core style and makes the portion seem stilted and adds to the strange atmosphere of the new world that Ludi has entered. Her reaffirming of her abilities shows that she is questioning both her existence and that of the world around her, wondering how and why she is stopped by this wall that separates her from the rest of society. The imagery of racism as a physical being, a wall, shows how restricting it is in her society. The issue that defines her place is a tangible thing, making it seem both even more real to the reader and also as an obstacle that Ludi herself can overcome if she is able to bring herself high enough. Another quote that Petrie's style is shown in is, "And he was through. She could tell by looking at him that the effort of reading had left him a little tired, just like Pop or Mrs. Pizzini." In this quote, we see Ludi's understatement of the physical and social distance between the many people in her life, the Chandlers, Mrs. Pizzini, and Pop. By comparing them all together through this minor detail, which stands out to the reader due to the incorrect grammar and use of a dependent clause as a sentence, shows again Ludi's belief that all people can be equal, and that it is only physical limitations, the environment or neighborhood around them, that keeps them from achieving their goal of being so. Another quote that her style is shown in is, "The figures on the other side of it loomed up life-size, and they could see her, but there was this wall in between which prevented them from mingling on an equal footing." In the text, it immediately follows the previous quote about the enchanted garden. The juxtaposition and contradiction of the words "loomed up life-size" shows how Ludi views authority figures as having a physical largeness that goes beyond their bodies. Also, the alliteration in this phrase makes it seem more childlike, like the people being described are kind of like monsters out of a storybook. Petrie repeats the word loom and loomed throughout the novel when describing obstacles in Louise's way that keep her from reaching her dream. The debt, the buildings around her, the wealthy white people in her neighborhood and in her life. The word gloomy is also repeated mostly when describing Jones, the super, in the street, which adds to the gray, depressing atmosphere and the lifestyle of people who are forced to stay in that world for their entire lives. It also calls to mind the lack of nature, happiness, and emphasizes the lack of comfort found in industrial urban landscapes, in slums like this one. An additional quote is living here is like living in a structure that has no roof, but no partitions, so that privacy is destroyed, and even the sound of one's breathing becomes a known familiar thing to each and every tenant. Again, Petrie uses imagery that describes both the sounds and sights around Ludi. In this metaphor, Ludi breaks down the real physical barriers around her and shows the pervasiveness of the street into all parts of her life. The people and things around her are ever present, constantly surrounding her, taking away her privacy. It makes the lives of everyone on the street seem homogeneous, like the minute details of their lives don't matter, and they are all the same just because they live on the same street. Another quote is Junto has a brick in his hand, just one brick, the final one needed to complete the wall that had been building up around her for years. When that last brick was shoved in place, she would be completely walled in. Ludi views Junto's power over her as a brick, as if once he acted in controlling her, her life would forever be defined by the walls of the expectations and biases that society had about her. Also, this quote shows that she views the walls as incomplete, something that was not part of nature, but a man-made structure, something that one could put together and dismantle, leading to her act of smashing the walls around her as she killed and beat Boots to death. One quote that I forgot to include in the presentation, but I think really stands out, was she saw the rows of dilapidated old houses, the small dark rooms, the long steep flights of stairs, the narrow dingy hallways, the little lost girls in Mrs. Hedges' apartment, the smashed homes where the women did drudgery because their men had deserted them. She saw all of those things and struck at them. The alliteration of the D at the end of the novel adds to the imagery of the thudding of Ludi killing Boots with a candlestick. And this portion of the text shows her finally breaking down the barrier and starting to take control of her life so that she can start anew and finally work on her goals and dreams. The very last sentence of the novel was, "The street was soon deserted, empty, quiet, and it could have been any street in the city, for the snow laid a delicate film over the sidewalk, over the brick of the tired old buildings, gently obscuring the grime and the garbage and the ugliness." This quote is about Ludi's new opportunity. The street that she is leaving looks the same as any, rich or poor, even the new one that Ludi will be moving to. It shows that this street and its values are repeated all over America, and it is a metaphor for how racism is present on every street, in every neighborhood, and in every society in America. It is said immediately after Ludi is again on a magical train, leaving, thinking about how the street was the root of all of her problems, and shows that although she is moving to somewhere new, she will always be followed by the biases and figurative walls around her. So throughout the entire novel, there is the deep imagery of the walls and it like listing adjectives about the environment, because the environment is what forced her to have a dream deferred, and the people and things around her are what kept her from achieving her goals and being able to become successful and achieve more of an equal footing with uh, like the whites and people of higher economic statuses. Also, one thing that I noticed, and I might just be reading into it too much, was um, her use, like Petrie's use of certain names as like to describe the people's character. So Mrs. Hedges is an ever-present part of society, and so she's named Hedges as a part of nature and as a part of a literal part of the environment. Min seems like Min calls mine kind of like minus, and she is a very described as like a small person. She doesn't take up much space. Every single time she's mentioned throughout the novel, she is shrinking into the chair that she's sitting in or into the background of whatever scene she's in. And also, the super name is Jones, and it's like if you're jonesing for something, you want it. So I think it's because every single time Jones is mentioned, he's always wanting Ludi. He's always wanting a younger woman or something better for himself, or a new apartment with windows instead of staying in the cellar. As well, I hope this isn't running on too long, but I included this image of the an actual street taken or an actual building taken on 116th Street, which is the main setting of the novel. It is where Ludi lives. So this is the actual type of apartment that she would have stayed in. It shows the kind of dirt in the street, the lack of comfort, lack of green space, or anything that kind of would bring liveliness. It is a very urban landscape, very dull, gray and gloomy one, which adds to and shows how Pichu was correct in her description of the sad and depressing atmosphere of Pichu's life while she lived on the street.